All right, we've come to the final step in the road to move beyond partisan politics. The first step was doing a heart check, asking yourself if you really do truly want to be a free thinker, with understanding that if you want it so bad, you will do the work it takes to become free. The second through fourth steps outline this work. The second step is being committed to becoming aware of how our human psychology shapes our interaction with politics, which involved recognizing how we are self-justifying creatures, emotional more than rational, and inclined to follow a tribe regardless of what we may actually believe or think. And part of this step then involved listening to the very best the other side has to offer, drumming up the courage to step outside your echo chambers and its caricatures of their side and do the brave thing of searching out for the very best arguments that challenge your current beliefs. You may still hold to your beliefs after reading the best counter arguments, but you'll likely see more gray in the world, and hopefully acknowledge that reasonable people can disagree on many things. The third step is practicing news sobriety. Our news outlets are biased not only in their interpretation of what is happening, but in their very selection of the stories they put before us. The key here is to be honest enough to recognize that it's not only the other side's news stations that are unreasonably biased and demonizing their enemies, but that your side is also very biased and engaged in rhetoric that inflames. The psychology we discussed in the second video clearly points to an obvious solution. Stop watching and listening to this stuff. It's not going to do your psyche or our society any good. The fourth step involves reaching out to befriend someone who's on the opposite side of the aisle. When you have a flesh and blood example of a Democrat or Republican who is in fact kind and loving, it'll be a little harder for you to hold on to those gross exaggerations that the two political parties are peddling. And now we come to the fifth and final step. In some ways, you could say this step is where the rubber meets the road, where you put this all into practice. I'd argue that if people followed through with this single step, American politics would change overnight. This step is to make the pledge to vote for people who have the courage to at times break from their political party. People or candidates who are explicitly independent thinkers, either because they run as independents, best case scenario, or because they are vocal about how they have views and beliefs that are cross-cutting. For example, we should be able to find Republican politicians who are for tax cuts, like you'd expect, but who also recognize and honor the role immigrants play in boosting our economy by favoring immigration-friendly policy. And there should be the option for voting for Democratic politicians who want a military budget of $500 billion instead of $900 billion, but who are also pro-life. Real, more independent thinking, free-thinking people should have views that are not cookie cutter, but reflect their own unique personhood and beliefs. Now, a political party by definition is going to have a platform, an organized, laid out set of beliefs and policy positions, and politicians are naturally going to pick the party that best reflects their beliefs. But we should be asking, should there be more people who are split down the middle, more people for whom it's not a clear-cut decision whether they should vote Republican or Democrat? And in the same vein, I'd hope and imagine that we could have candidates who decide to run with one party or another, but just barely, In other words, they're only slightly more aligned with the Republican Party than with Democrats, or they have only a little more in common with Democrats than they do with Republicans. Where are these people? If we had more of these types, then we could expect to see more bills passed with considerable bipartisan support. I think if we had these types of people in office, our dialogue and our decisions would become less emotional and more rational. I believe before the 1990s, almost all politicians used to live in the DC area with their families. Their wives or husbands would interact with each other at gatherings. Their kids would be in baseball leagues together. They had more opportunity to see each other as regular human beings. And we need more of that. It's not easy to determine who in office is honest, who is courageous enough to hold to their convictions, even if it means departing from their political tribe at times. You can go to govtrack.us to get information about how candidates are voting. You can also visit Vote View, and there you can find a rating on how ideologically extreme a candidate is. Vote View gives candidates an ideological score. So you can see that the representative in your district is, say, 51% more conservative than Republicans currently in the House. That's a score from my local rep. But I think the best resource I found was the Lugar Center's Bipartisan Index out of Georgetown University. On their website, it reads, "What does the Bipartisan Index measure?" In the most general terms, the Bipartisan Index measures, first, the frequency with which a member of Congress sponsors bills that are co-sponsored by at least one member of the opposing party, and second, the frequency with which a member co-sponsors bills introduced by members of the opposite party. These two components contribute equally to a member's overall score. On the sponsorship side of the formula, members also derive some credit for sponsoring bills with greater numbers of bipartisan co-sponsors. Then it reads, "Why did you create the Bipartisan Index?" There are innumerable studies, rankings, and indexes that grade members according to a partisan, parochial, or special interest standard. There also are vote studies that rate members from most conservative to most liberal. It's important, we sought to develop an objective measure of Congress's activity that would focus on bipartisanship, rather than where members sit on an ideological spectrum. We start from the premise that bipartisanship is not centrism. I think that's important. Members at the opposite ends of the political spectrum can function in a bipartisan manner if they recognize the importance of building a consensus for their ideas and if they're open to at least considering the proposals of the other party. I like that last part because I happen to have some views that are not centrist at all, but are very extreme. But you can be extreme on the left and on some issues, and I'm extreme on the right and the other, right? It is an interesting website to look over. Representatives in the Senate and House are given a score, and the Lugar Center regards any score above 0 as a good score or bipartisan score. On their site, it says, "We designate members who score above 0 as bipartisan legislators because they are above average compared to the 20-year baseline scores of their respective group." For some reference, I noticed that in 2017, 149 out of the 438 in the House scored above a 0. Interestingly, or sadly, in 2023, the number was reduced to 129 representatives with a score above 0. Now let me turn to a very real and practical problem in my proposal. What if you look at the candidates running for office in your district or state, and none of them reflect your beliefs very well, and none of them are courageous free thinkers, which is especially likely once they narrow them down to the final two, right? Do you just vote for the lesser of two evils? That used to be my philosophy. And talking to friends, that's pretty much how everyone frames their decision. But I'm going to propose that if neither candidate is honestly within range of being a free-thinking, honest, and courageous human being, then don't vote for either of them. Abstain. Do more voting in the primaries, but then let your abstaining be a protest. If enough people actually did function in this logical way, then eventually we'd get different people into office. I had some people pretty mad at me for doing this. Some even accused me of helping to get Trump into office. I had to clearly say, I never voted for Trump. I didn't want and don't want him in office for a myriad of reasons. And it's not fair. It really is not fair to say that my not wanting to support Biden or Harris is the equivalent of supporting Trump. That's dishonest. It is more honest to withhold my vote from people I don't have respect for than simply to cast my vote for one side out of hate for the other. There's got to be a better way. There is a better way, and it's refusing to compromise out of fear. In light of the evidence, of all that we've covered in these last 5 videos, in light of the empirical evidence that our echo chambers are making us less informed, more polarized, more biased, more suspicious, more distrustful, more hateful, in light of all of this, we have a choice to make. We can naively or arrogantly believe we are superior beings that rise above our human psychological hardware and stay committed to our side of the aisle. Or we can come to the aisle, a place in the middle. A place in the middle that's not devoid of beliefs or causes or convictions, but a place that has prioritized listening to all sides, to being committed to accept ideas individually without succumbing to ideology universally. This 5th step is really about an identity shift. Can you divorce yourself from your tribe? Are you flexible or fluid enough to pivot, to re-envision yourself as someone who can pick and choose what you want to believe no matter what side of the aisle it lands on, and no matter what your family or friends might say. Can what you believe to be true, can truth itself take pride of place over comfort or familiarity or even acceptance? Are you that free? Do you want to be? That is the question I'm going to leave you with. And again, thanks for your time.